I call the honourable member Paul Goldsmith.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I wish you the very best for this year, and thank you for the work that you have done to the country and into this Parliament over a long career. Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to speak to this debate that we're having on the Prime Minister's statement. And I look back over the summer. I took my family down to the South Island on a road trip, and since it was wet and freezing most of the time, I spent a great deal of time reading. And I came across an article in the Spectator magazine entitled "Joy to the World," and that cheered me up when the rain was coming in horizontally. And it made the point that while pessimism sells in the media, deluging us with tales of woe and Armageddon, in many ways 2013 was the best year in human history. More wealth has been created than ever before, with global GDP rising to around $73 trillion this year, and thanks to increasing global trade and surging economies in Asia, that wealth globally has never been shared more evenly. And the UN's 2000 Millennium Development Goal, you might recall, of halving the number of people living in poverty, living in $1 a day by 2015, was achieved 5 years early. The goal of halving the number of people without access to drinking water by 2015 was achieved last year. China, which is home to a fifth of the world's population, has steadily opened its market to market capitalism, Mr. Speaker, and international trade over the past 3 or 4 decades, and has reduced the number of people living in poverty there from 84% to 10% today. So, yes, there are dreadful wars going on in Syria and places like that. There are millions still living in poverty, and there are economic and environmental challenges. But when we step back and take a global view, Mr. Speaker, we are living in a remarkable era with the prospect of seeing the end of famine and extreme poverty in the next few decades. And what's lain behind that transformation? It's been the spread of global trade that has followed the progressive opening up of previously closed or heavily protected economies such as India and China, which is why I struggle to understand the logic of those, particularly amongst the Greens, who dedicate themselves to opposing further progress in trade liberalisation, such as being attempted through the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It is indeed international trade which is lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty as we speak. And as a trading nation, New Zealand has been a beneficiary of globalisation and stands to benefit much more if current trade talks succeed. And meantime, millions of people have a chance to raise their living standards as they are drawn into the global economy. But of course, global competition is always challenging, and if we're to continue to prosper in a dynamic and competitive world, the next generation of New Zealanders, Mr. Speaker, will have to shake off the entitlement mentality that has been allowed to develop over the past few decades in New Zealand, and that's a real challenge for us. Will New Zealand and countries, the so-called developed countries, be overtaken and left behind? Well, we may well be, unless we recognise that we do have to continue to work hard and have to value education and the importance of entrepreneurship and business in our country and our economy. And I thought the Australian Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, put it pretty well in his speech to Davos a few weeks ago. He said that the global financial crisis, hasn't changed any of the basic laws of economics. You can't spend what you haven't got. No country has ever taxed or subsidised its way to prosperity, and you don't address debt and deficit with yet more debt and deficit. And profit is not a dirty word, because success in business is something to be proud of. And above all, you can't have strong communities without strong economies to sustain them, and you can't have strong economies without profitable private businesses. As government gets smaller, citizens get bigger, and that's what we want. We want empowered citizens. So I wish Mr. Abbott and his government every success in translating those ideas into reality in Australia, a country that has done incredibly well over the past few decades, but has got its own challenges right now. And as our Prime Minister has indicated, New Zealand has had 5 years of strong, stable, sensible government, and we've made remarkable progress over that period. And the Prime Minister, in his statement, alluded to a lot of those things. He Let's not forget that the current account deficit was almost 9% of GDP when we came in 2008. It's now 4.3%. The net external debt has blown out to 84% of GDP back in 2008. It's now down to 71%. Inflation. Inflation, that great theft of the savings of the poor people, of the people who are struggling, who David Clark seeks to represent, was running at 5% when Labour was in power. It's now only 1.6%, and people can trust the value of their money. Mortgage interest rates were averaging 10.9% in 2008. And now they're averaging 5.9. And yes, they may be going up a little bit this year, but they're still a hang of a lot cheaper than they were only 5 years ago when we came to power. And that makes a real difference to the living standards and the money that people have in their pockets, not just in Epsom, where I come from, but all around the country. Food prices were going up 11% a year when Labour was last in power. They're now only 1.5%. Government spending had gone up 50% over the 5 years until 2008. It was a runaway train. Now government spending is under control. And the economy had been going backwards for 4 quarters in 2008. Now we're amongst, at 3.5% last year, one of the highest rates of growth in the OECD. And most importantly, the Treasury was predicting endless years of government deficits when we came to power. There was no track to get back to surplus. Now, in 2014 and 15, we'll be back to surplus. And this government, Mr. Speaker, hasn't wavered from its 4 priorities that were outlined at the start. We're about responsibly managing the government finances, just like New Zealanders respect us too. And there are risks. Why do we have to be cautious? Because internationally, the world still remains in economically uncharted waters. Nobody's quite sure what's going to come from tapering and trying to stop the printing of money that's been going on around the world, and what that will mean over the next few years. So there are risks, and we need to be careful. Secondly, we've been concentrating on building a more competitive and productive economy, because that's what we need to create jobs and to increase your wages. And so the business growth agenda, which the government has talked about consistently over the last few years, is about rebuilding the growth capacity of the economy. Lots of little reforms carried out consistently. And Stephen Joyce and Bill English have been leading that charge in particular. And it's about steadily removing the roadblocks to discourage investment in New Zealand. And I'll just run through those 6 areas again, just so people can be reminded of them. It's about keeping open our markets and building strong people relationships to trade with the world. And the FTA with China, which we do congratulate the Labour government for being involved of, and I just hope they haven't given up on free trade, has been a real great deal for New Zealand and has increased. Where would we be without that China trade? I have no idea. Second is innovation. The national-led government is putting a lot of resources into assisting research and development and innovation throughout the private sector, and we need to continue to increase private sector investment in research and development to reach international norms if we're going to be a successful economy. Thirdly, we need to keep the skills that we need for a successful and innovative trading nation, encouraging more of our people into areas like engineering, ICT and science, and history and other such subjects such as I discovered. Encouraging more capital to invest in New Zealand is the fourth area. The mixed ownership program has been a great success in terms of giving a shot of life to the stock exchange in New Zealand. We need to build on that. Capital investment is core to building competitive industries and sustaining jobs. Fifthly, we're about removing red tape and providing certainty to investors, particularly in the resources industries, which could be so important to the New Zealand economy in the future. And sixthly, we need to keep building infrastructure towards a growth-orientated country. In Auckland, we're seeing the results of that with very significant investment in the roading infrastructure. We're very much looking forward to the Waterview Tunnel opening and that second bypass in the Auckland motorway system, which will make a big difference to how we get around. So the first area is getting back to surplus. Second area, building productive economy. Thirdly, getting better public services within tight budgets. Now, I think the government has been very successful in about making sure that taxpayers' money is spent well and actually getting something out of it. I think Bill English was right when he talked about, in the past, centre-right governments have tended to think about smaller government as just about slicing bits off. But what we need to actually is a bit more demanding than that. It's about community expecting governments to actually solve a few problems and then move on, rather than just continuing to live off that. So finally, that's rebuilding Christchurch is the fourth area that we're focused on. And on that basis, Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to be part of this debate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker.
I call the honourable member Clea Curran.